so that you know something about your background. Who your dad is and who I am and so on, where we came from and how we started, is that let's start off with myself. I am a twin. I have a twin brother. Of course, you never met him because he passed away a long time ago. He passed away in about 1980, 81. Was any of you born? Was you born then? No? Not yet. The name was George. And my name is David. George and David were twins. And we were born in Floral Park, no more than 3 miles from where I live today. My father was a laundryman, working laundry. The clothes are washed, and he ironed them, and he pressed them. That's how he got paid. Okay. And he, of course, he rented a store, and he started his laundry, and we lived. He lived in behind the laundry, in back of the laundry. In those days, you work in the front of the store and you live in the back of the store. And it's not like today. Your father has a house here and he has an office downtown, someplace else, and he lived very nicely. But in our time, that was considered pretty good, although some people had it better. And we lived in the back of the store. I was born in the back of the store, my brother George and I. That was in 1923. And they printed a little article in the newspaper, and I still have a little article saying that Chinese twins were born in the laundry and so on. And my father brought us in to the world. They didn't have no hospitals or took you to the hospital or anything like that. My father took care of that. He cut the umbilical cord and all. And he wanted to buy the laundry where he lived, the store, the building. And those days, if you're Chinese, they wouldn't sell you the property. You're Chinese. There was, you can call it racial discrimination or whatever you want to, Where's Karen?
I'm right here.
Oh, okay. So they wouldn't sell you any property. They'll come right and tell you, you're Chinese, we can't sell it to you. That was in Floral Park. No more than 3 miles from where I live today. So, after a while, my mother said, well, we have to look for, she was very practical and everything, she said, we have to look for a place to buy, and we can, instead of paying rent, we want to buy a piece of property. And they say they're very thrifty people. And so he bought us a building in Queens Village. And we kept that building until year 1999 when I sold it. He bought that building for $15,500. That's like $15 million in those days, because in those days you can get on a train for 5 cents, and you get on a bus is 5 cents. Telephone calls were 5 cents, and you can buy orange ice for 1 penny. 1 penny was a lot of money. And pressing a shirt, which took you over 5 minutes, to press out a shirt, fold it and all, was like 8 cents, 7 or 8 cents. 7 or 8 pennies. And so by 1923, after I was born, my father bought the Hempstead Avenue building. And so that's where we grew up. And that's where Richard, your dad, and Donald went to school there, and went to, I don't know if they started kindergarten there or not. I think Donald started kindergarten there. And Richard was too young to go to school. I think he went to school in Albany, right?
Who, me?
Yes.
No, I went to school in New York.
No,
Kindergarten.
On
Kindergarten.
Hempstead Avenue.
On Hempstead Avenue.
On Hempstead, you started also?
I
You
did.
Started
I
at
I
school,
started
kindergarten
in Lear.
PS 34.
Yeah.
I started kindergarten in Lear.
Yeah, and then Donald, of course, went to school there. And that was in Queens Village, and we grew up there with Brother George. And then Eddie was born there. Uncle Eddie. Uncle Eddie is about 2 years younger than I am. And there was a Lily. She passed away in 1931. I was born in 1923. She was born, she must have been born before that, before I was born in 1923. She must have been born maybe 2 years before I was born. She must have been born in like 1921. And I suppose, I never looked that closely. Her probably date of birth is on her tombstone. She's buried in Cypress Hill area. Most of the families are buried there, including my father, my mother, Uncle George, Uncle Eddie, and Lily. Lily is my older sister, 2 years old. I have an older sister who was born in China. Her name is Pendi. You've met her, right? She came there once before. And she's 4 years older than I am. She was born in China. Uncle John is 10 years older than I am. His Chinese name was Li Kim Poi. And they always called him, an American name is John. John Lee. But his Chinese name was Li Kim Poi. And he was born in China. Have you any of you met him? John? In Florida?
No.
You ever go down to Florida to meet him? Or, no? In New York?
Janelle, you've met Uncle John when you were young.
No? No? Well, anyway, he always had a farming business. And he was always in the farming business. He was in the laundry business too. Let me tell you a little bit about why in those days there were a lot of Chinese people in the laundry business. If you go back in history, back when this country was in the beginning of this country, of course, according to your history, they studied, and Sean knows about history, right? English came from England. They settled where? Up where?
Plymouth.
Huh? Plymouth. Yeah. Well, they settled up in New England states. The English came over, and the Germans and the Swedes and the Irish and so on. The Irish came because they were starving to death in Ireland. The potato famine, right? And they came here, and so you had the Irish and the English and French and the Italians. A lot of Italians came over. And they settled on the east coast of eastern part of the United States. And as the frontier was moved further and further west, evicting all the Indians, taking away their land, and they kept going further west, chasing the Indians out, taking away their land. And then the Spaniards came up from the south, and at around that time, around the middle 1800s, the railroad was being built. They needed laborers. They need people to do the hard work. Like today, who's doing all your gardening and picking up your dishes after you eat? Who?
Mexican.
Mexicans, Hispanics, they call it, because nobody would want to do those kind of work, and nobody wanted to dig in the mountains and blast pass through the Rocky Mountains. So they brought a lot of Chinese over as laborers. They call them coolies. And the word coolie comes from China. When they say coolie, means a guy, a laborer that did hard labor work. And they brought a lot of these people over, and they came from southern China. In those days, because when China was kept to themselves, isolated themselves, they didn't want to be, they didn't want to be influenced by the Western world. So they kept to themselves, and then the only people that, of course, Perry, when he came to China to trade, the Chinese chased him out. Then he went to Japan and traded over there successfully. And then when he came back over to China, they always came back to the southern part of China, someplace around here, the southern part. See? This is the southern part of China. This is Tibet, and the southern part of China is over here. This is this is Formosa. Okay? So southern China is over here, and Hong Kong and China is over here. And this Han area is all settled by the Han clan. China has 55 minority type of people, 55 different kinds of people settled, who are all Chinese. Our background, which is part of you, is from the Han group, the Han clan, Han, H-A-N. And if you look at this map, you'll see that all the beige area is all Han. And then the green area is a different kind of people, and the orange area and the yellow area and so on. But there's a total of 55 different groups of people. They call it minorities, 55 minorities, and they're all dressed similar to what you see here. And the Tibetans don't dress like the southern Chinese, and the Chinese don't dress like the western people up north. That was in those days. Of course, today is a modern time, they changed a lot. But they have, some of their, when they have their holidays, they go back to some of their original dress. You know, just like we have here. You go to Wittenberg and you see the people dressed like colonial days. Well, in China it's the same way. So we come from the Han group of people, and they settled over here. So when the Americans came to, the Perry came, the people, Perry was he was the captain of the ships, or he wanted to trade. They always came to southern China. So what happened? All the southern Chinese were taken as laborers, recruited and taken to the west coast. At that time, the East started to settle, and they kept going westward. And they had no one to labor, and the Indians wouldn't work, are not working people. The Chinese always have, until this day, very industrious and hard-working people, right, Sean? They're hard-working people, and thrifty and hard-working. So they used them to build railroads, and that's how a lot of the Chinese came. Now, when the railroad was finished, the railroad started in the east and went west, and in the west they started to go east, you know, and they joined in the middle of the United States. And the sad part of it, when the Chinese cut the road through, cut through the Rocky Mountains, that was the hardest part. The east was easy because it's all pretty flat ground and so on. They built bridges and so on. But to come through the Rocky Mountains, it was almost an impossible thing to do. And in those days, they had to blast their way through with dynamite. How do you do that? They would dig from the bottom and cut out, but then you have these high mountains. And what do? They use these Chinese people, laborers, and they're usually light in body and weight. So they put them in a basket and lower them down the side of the mountain. And they would sit there and drill a hole into the mountain, put a stick of dynamite in there, and they say, "Okay, pull up," you know. And after you lit the fuse, they pull them up. If they don't pull them up fast enough, goodbye, he's gone. So the Chinese did all that hard work, including laying railroad tracks, including digging out and carrying the stuff, the rocks away, were done by Chinese. And if it wasn't the Chinese, the West wouldn't have been built that easily, because the Irishmen were big and thick. They can't lower them in a basket. They put the Chinese in there. And as a result, about 10,000 Chinese died in building the railroad, cutting it through the Rocky Mountains, and of course meeting the center part of America where they joined together. And when they drove the last spike in, they had Irish, Italian, Swedes and all there at the present time, including the president of the railroad and all, but there wasn't any Chinese. They said that there was a Chinese guy who drove the golden spike, supposedly the last spike into the railroad, he pounded most of it in. The last stroke was pounded in by the president of the railroad, who was responsible for building the railroad. The Chinese, of course, rebelled because they said, we're not getting the same pay as the Irishmen. We're Chinese. We're not getting the same pay as the Swedes and the Italians. So we're going on strike. And of course, the strike wasn't successful because the Chinese, in order to work there, they supplied them with Chinese rice, food and stuff, and they went on strike. So simply the railroad people just cut off their food. So they had no food. So they had to be forced back to work again at the same pay they came with. The strike didn't do any good. So they finished the railroad. And after the railroad was finished, you had 100,000 Chinese people. What do you do with them? Some went up to Canada to build more railroads. Some settled in Nebraska. Some in Kentucky. Some in the west, some went east to New York. Some settled in San Francisco. And to this day, there's a Chinese fishing village. Not much left of it, but there are still fishing. So the Chinese had fishing villages. They went into farming. They even dug some caves in for the winery, for the wine business. And some of them went into the vineyards to help make wine. Some went into mining. And even the sad part, when they did go into mining, they discovered gold, and some of them were caught back there digging, and they, like everybody else was, they would be robbed. Okay? And then the Chinese were forced to do all the dirty work, like the so-called Hispanics are doing today, pick up the dishes. And the worst part of it, when they tried to do something else, they wouldn't let them. So when they were building the railroad, and they want to make extra money, so they went over to the Irishman or the Italian and said, hey, you see your shirt is all dirty, I wash it for you. So they wash a shirt, and they got paid extra for it. So nobody would want to do that kind of work. You don't get an Irishman go washing a Swedish guy's shirt, or some other, or an Italian going to do somebody else's shirt laundry. So the Chinese kept washing clothes, and they set up. Nobody bothered them. Nobody wanted to do that kind of work. So they hung up a sign, laundry. People kept bringing clothes in, so they wash it, iron it. That's how they stayed in the laundry business. And while, of course, they were cooking, the cooking smell tastes good. Ah, what are you eating, Charlie? You know, I'm cooking the food. So they taste, oh, it's good. And they cooking extra dishes and food for there were some of the people on the railroad. And the next thing you know, they had their own restaurants going. And nobody wanted to do that. You don't get a Frenchman or a Swede or some other kind of people working on the railroad cooking for somebody else. So the Chinese would cook. So they opened the restaurant. And nobody wanted to do that kind of work. So then you have two types of work, two fields of work, laundry and restaurant. And believe it or not, that set went from the middle 1800s right up to 1900s, and to this day, Chinese still have laundry, more so restaurants, because the food is good, the food is very tasty, and the spices are great. So that's why the Chinese have restaurants. And to this day they have restaurants, famous restaurants like the French. And the Chinese have famous restaurants. If you go to China, of course the Chinese live on their stomach, you know, they've got a lot of restaurants in China too. So, as far as I'm concerned, the Chinese food is better than the French and better than the Italian. They're the best. As far as being the best, I would say this here, that the food and work and hard work, the Chinese work hard at their work and do everything successfully. And when you have, to this day, when you have an Italian restaurant not making any money, and they were going out of business, you know who falls in there, who goes and fills that place? A Chinese person would go in there, say, hey, I'll take over the business, and convert it to a Chinese restaurant, and they do very well. Because they're willing to work hard and produce a good dish of food, and they stay in the business, and first thing you know, they got a successful business. And that applies really, in everything they do. Even the farming business. And you get a Norwegian farmer, and he farms it, he's not making any money. He's planting the same thing that everybody else was planting, and he finds out he's not making any money. So the Chinese farmer would come and say, hey, I'll take over your farm. And they start planting Chinese vegetables. They're selling it to the restaurants, they're selling it to other people, and they actually became successful. That's part of our family. My twin brother and brother John ran a Chinese farm on Long Island. I had a farm. They owned the farm. They even set up a farm in Florida. That's why I asked you if you people have went down to Florida to see the farm. So the Chinese were in the farming business. But even out west and even down south, some of the Chinese were in the farming business. They even used some of the Chinese picking cotton. But they found the Chinese can do better than just picking cotton. Picking cotton don't take much brains, you know. So they use them doing other things, more skillful work. Okay? And by as far as being skillful work, and if every one of you guys can get a chance to go to China, you'll find them doing very skillful work. They're intelligent people. I don't want to knock anybody, but if you go to Africa, they're still living in those grass huts. They lived 200-300 years ago. But if you go to China, you'll see the difference. Every country, every person in this world has excel in skill and intelligence and accomplishments and so on. Each type of person, each type, whether he's Chinese or Japanese or Korean or from Africa or eastern part of Europe or western part of Europe. Each country excels in a certain field of work. Like today, the blacks excel in sports. But you find that if you get out into the hospitals, you'll find many Indians, Asians, or we'll call them Asians, in hospitals and working in the hospitals as doctors and nurses and so on, and in technical fields. The Chinese are capable, have the capability and the intelligence to excel in every field. Okay? So be proud of your heritage, because you come from a background of over 5,000 years of recorded history. 5,000 years of recorded history, right? What did some of the Chinese invent back in those days? Can you name anything?
Fireworks.
Huh?
Fireworks.
What?
Fireworks.
Fireworks. Gunpowder. Gunpowder, not fireworks. Gunpowder is used in fireworks. What else did they have? They invent something.
Paper.
Huh?
Paper.
Paper. And paper what? What is paper used for?
Writing.
And-
Recorded history.
And what? What do you use paper? You got any paper in your pocket, in your wallet?
Recorded history.
Huh?
Recorded history.
No, what's the paper in your wallet?
Identification.
Huh?
Identification and money.
Money. Paper money. Chinese were the first to use paper money instead of carrying heavy coins. I'm going back thousands of years of recorded history, and what do they use when the planes are flying and the ships are on the ocean to know where they're going? Huh? What? What?
Radar.
No, they didn't have radar in those days. Everything was crude in those days. What did they have?
Stars?
How does the ship get on the ocean?
Yeah.
Huh? How does ships stay on the ocean?
Compass.
Compass, right. Chinese invented the compass. Chinese invented a lot of things. They say they invented the wheel, but I don't know. But the wheels, they say, go back to the days of the cavemen.
First calculator.
The Chinese invented a lot of things. Huh?
Calculator backwards.
Yeah. Abacus. Do you know the abacus? They competed with and they beat the computer and the calculator. One guy wore the abacus, and the other guy wore the computer, and they beat him with the abacus. You ever see them working and check? Oh, their fingers like that, very fast. You add up figures, and they can add figures very subtract, divide, add, and very fast. And it's still used. The abacus is still used today in China, although it's in the back countries instead of a calculator. Of course, the students today, the young people, will use calculators. The abacus is a great thing, and they have a scale. They still use that in the back country instead of using the other type of scales, digital scales. So the Chinese invented all of this. Chinese invented buildings that were 2 and 3 stories high, or built them 2 and 3 stories. And then you go to Africa, they never built anything higher than 1 story. They didn't know how. They didn't find the need for it. But in China, you will find that. You find forts. The Great Wall was built. The Great Wall was 2,000 some odd miles long. I'd like you people to base some of the opportunity. I know what your ambitions are. To travel, to go to China and travel and see some of the accomplishments and some of the historical places that you can go to. But anyway, getting back to, now you know why the Chinese are in the restaurant, a lot of them in the restaurant business. Because during those days when they put first 25,000 and 50,000 Chinese and then more. And later on, another 25,000. So there were a lot of Chinese. And then they were trying to push them out. After the railroad was built, they said, we don't need you anymore. Get out, And they ran them out. And some of them were pushed out and some of them were lynched even. Because they were taking jobs away from the Irish and the Italian. Some of them were saved by a shoe company in Massachusetts. There's a book now that Dorian sent me, and I'm going to see if I can get one to your dad, and you can look at the book, and it gives a history of the Chinese from the beginning to where up to this day, So the Chinese worked very hard, and they never bothered anybody. They never rebellious and anything like that, and they just worked hard and made money. So a lot of them have been accused of making money here and sending it back to China. And they called this country, the Chinese in those days called this country, do you know what they called this country? What? Gold Mountain. Because a lot of them were working in the mining field, mining, and they got gold, and they went back and they built a lot of homes back then, and